that people, especially people of privilege, have with food currently is so problematic. To me, we need to rechannel a lot of that energy into really targeting some of the bigger questions out there. I think also the media has in many ways dummied down a lot of the conversation, and you might talk to people, anybody, or students specifically, about food, people who are really interested in it, and they'll say, oh, you know, small farms are best, and we've got to grow in the garden, but I don't think that many of them can actually articulate why.
This bed I'm pretty proud of because I planted all of this bed here. Got everything from lavender to cilantro to sage to thyme. Our education program, we do hands-on gardening activities in the beginning, learning about fruits and vegetables and different nutrients inside. Then we use these vegetables that they learned about in the garden, and we introduce the kids to some chefs and introduce them to the craft of cooking. And they use these vegetables that they learned about are harvested to cook. And basically our main mission is to show them the importance of healthy eating and try and develop a deeper food philosophy. Right now I'm just harvesting some lettuce. So you might wonder, where does all this produce go? So during baseball season, we're harvesting all this and it's going to our bistros, and they're incorporating it into the food they're cooking. Obviously, we're using it to cook in our education programs. And then when we have too much, like what I'm harvesting for right now, is we have donation boxes, and we may bring a box of produce, or they come pick it up. YMCA, or Boys and Girls Club, clubhouses come pick up boxes of produce. These green lettuces right here, they're specifically made to grow in hydroponic systems. So I think they look really beautiful, and they've been thriving.
When I was actually in college, I went to NYU, and we had a program where we got to go to Cuba and study the agricultural system there. And at that time, Cuba wasn't getting any kind of oil. They were completely cut off, and so they had a really strong local food system where they were growing everything within within the community, and then people had amazing gardens with all different types of food. And so that was kind of like the beautiful image that I went into when I saw it. And when I went there, I saw that example, and I thought, okay, well, when I go back to school, can we take that kind of system back to New York? And I got back and I realized, well, it's so different there, and there's so much fast food, and there's so many more options for people in terms of their eating. And I realized that having access to fresh local foods was actually like a real luxury.
Well, I think we think a lot about hunger and poverty and the relationship between those things, about people not being able to get enough food, but I think we maybe think less about the actual experience of preparing food, and that sometimes the food that people have access to, even if they have enough of it, is of low quality, and that really impacts people's health and also their sense of well-being and their state of mind. So for example, if we think about how the problems of poverty compound, so take McDonald's for example, right? Take the dollar meal, right? So we all know that one of the cheapest things you can get is a McDonald's hamburger. You can go get a quarter pounder with cheese for $1. A person who's eating that because that's the food that they have access to isn't actually being nourished, which means that they're hungry on a different level.
People living in a food desert are people who don't have access to safe, affordable, healthy food. Some of the kids who are living in food deserts in San Francisco who visit us are kids coming from places like the Tenderloin or Hunters Point or Bayview. If you don't have access to healthy food, then basically you're surviving off junk food. Also, just the story of food, I think, is missing. If you ask many kids, where does food come from, they'll say from the store. And part of what we want to show here at the garden is that food comes from the earth. It's grown. We want to show the story of food and create a deeper food philosophy.
I started to see at that point the real injustices between who was actually able to access the type of foods that I was eating, and I got really interested in education at that time because I started thinking about, if we can get this into schools, this growing and cooking of food into schools, and kids could start to learn really young that they deserve fresh, healthy food that's good for their bodies. I think a lot of students have more experience with purchasing foods and not so much with growing food and knowing what's available locally. And so the garden has been a really incredible experience because it takes students who have just grown up more in fast food culture and really connects them with what grows seasonally, how to harvest it, and how to cook with what's available here on campus. And so it's changed a lot of students' experiences in the world because instead of thinking of life as just being a consumer, they start really thinking about how can I cook something for myself, and how can I teach my friends about this, and then we interact with the greater community by putting on these big dinners at the church, which is for all San Francisco residents, and we get a very, very diverse group.
So our mission is to connect small farmers of color to urban communities of color. We also do a farmers market, which is just what you're seeing right here, and that happens on Saturday in front of Destiny Arts and Tuesday in front of the Children's Hospital. And then we also do a CSA program where we bring together, it's a little bit different than a traditional CSA where we bring together produce from maybe 3 or 4 farmers at this point. And one of the cool things about our markets and our CSAs is that we have a market match program. So this is a federal grant that allows us to match people who use EBT up to $10. So if you use $10 of EBT, you can get $20 worth of produce. It's really important to have access to healthful food no matter where you are, and viewing food justice not as just access to food, but viewing food justice sort of as connected to all sorts of inequalities and injustices that exist. It's not something that you just provide someone with a bag full of fresh produce, but there are a lot of sort of deeper systemic issues that need to be addressed. The goal of the organization is to build community, because when you have sort of a strong, resilient community, you will have the capacity to address a lot of issues, food injustice being one of them.
Hey, Maya.
Hi, Kelly.
Tell me what you're working on.
Okay, me and my partner, his name is Matt, we're both in a class called Civic Media, and it's essentially trying to understand what happens when the mainstream media isn't representing and or covering stories, and how the public responds by creating their own media. So we see that with kind of what you are doing, your organization is doing about food justice and environmental racism and stuff like that, and organizations like yours are taking these issues into their own hands to create change. I chose food deserts because I'm super interested and the way that we relate to food and how certain communities have less access to sustainable foods than others, and understanding why that is and what systems are used to create that cycle, you know?
Understand as an activist the issues that are happening in our communities. You know, I've definitely been impacted by just all of the kinds of slant, not having a level playing field. As an African American person, as a person who loves my community, loves my people, so I kind of bring that fire to the education department. And what I do is I go to high schools and I do smoothies, and I go to wherever I can, the street corners in West Oakland, to try to, talk about food desert, but also nourish people's bodies.
I think ideally, it would be great if food held greater importance in our culture. If we thought that the act of preparing and sharing food was something important that deserved to have more time and space in our lives. And then also if we all had easier access to high quality, inexpensive food, that would really help with that. I remember once hearing Michael Pollan speak. He's the author of The Omnivore's Dilemma and many other books about food. He's a sort of food advocate. And he said that these days people spend more time watching cooking shows than they actually do cooking. So that's interesting. I think it would be great if that changed.
Here at USF, we have our own garden. We cook food. We serve food to others. And I'm really interested is how can that be part of a curriculum? And I'm also interested at what point did we start saying reading books is good, working on the farm is bad? How do we get students reattached to food? So the first thing is to connect people with food, connect students with food, and to kind of just appreciate what real food is. But then the second thing is that the cooking of food is really interesting. You save money, it's collaborative, it's collective action, it's folk knowledge is often gendered, it's often folk knowledge that's reserved for women. And so suddenly students who have been, many of our students who have been served all their life are learning how to cook and create their own food. Then the third step is how do you teach students and faculty to serve other people? And then in many ways this goes down to the heart of the Jesuit mission, serving food to people who need it. I don't think USF's garden is going to be able to cure the ills of a food desert, but I think that it can start making students more aware of the problem, a problem that it's very invisible to many of our students who've never even gone into a neighborhood that has a food desert. But also try to start thinking creatively of if government's not going to help enough, and if capitalism's not going to help enough, maybe it's up to kind of civic action.